Hello, friends. Welcome to Parkinson's EmPower Talks, a journey of empowerment and understanding for living your best life with Parkinson's. Kick back, relax, and get comfortable. We're here to make your Parkinson's journey just a little bit easier. I'm your host, Daisy Reimer. I'm a nurse practitioner specialized in movement disorders and the director of medical advising and education for the Wisconsin Parkinson Association. The Wisconsin Parkinson Association's mission is to provide hope, community, support, and resources for people with Parkinson's and their loved ones. Welcome to Parkinson's EmPower Talks. Today we're talking about nutrition in Parkinson's disease, and my special guest is Kate Harrell, who is a registered dietitian. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you.
So glad to have you with us. Tell us a little bit more about your background in caring for people with Parkinson's.
Yes. So I've now been working with Parkinson's about 10 years, which is crazy to think about. But I initially got started when I owned a gym in Portland, Oregon. And one of our members, right at the tail end of being there, was diagnosed with Parkinson's. And it just broke my heart that I couldn't keep the gym open to continue to help him. So when I moved back to Wisconsin and started working for the YMCA, I was given the opportunity to work with two different clients with Parkinson's and quickly realized I had a passion for it and I wanted to learn more. So I got a certification from Power Moves, Rock Steady Boxing, and now pedaling for Parkinson's, and have been able to help both on the nutrition and exercise side, which I really so.
Fantastic. And so, when you talk about your experience, then at the YMCA, which YMCA are you at?
So we have Rock City Boxing and Pedaling for Parkinson's at the Oshkosh YMCA. That's where I do coach. So
Super. So let's kind of dive in, if you don't mind. I love this topic about both exercise and nutrition, just because I think that those are two of the main things that you can control in life, no matter what anything, life hands you. But those are two things that we can always make some changes or modifications to. So I think that especially nutrition, a lot of my patients they don't know where to start. They don't know what the restrictions, if there are any restrictions are, and they kind of don't know where to start. So hopefully you're going to give us lots of insight into that today. So tell us a little bit more about, is there a special diet? I know people don't like to talk about diets or lifestyle, a nutritional lifestyle that they should have if they have Parkinson's.
I do believe there's a strong push for more of a Mediterranean style diet. And there's actually an extension of that called the Mind diet. That's encouraged for both Parkinson's, but also dementia, Alzheimer's, etc. So I think one of the big aspects of that is more whole food versus processed, and more whole food like fruits and vegetables and whole grains that offer a lot of fiber, one, which is certainly key when people are struggling with constipation. They're also very nutrient dense, and so they offer a lot of protection for the body, but also for the brain, which is really important. Also, as part of that diet, I think more anti-inflammatory foods as well. So it's just a nice structure and way that we can encompass a lot of the recommendations we have for Parkinson's.
Now, not everybody is really familiar with Mind diet or even the Mediterranean diet. If people are, I know myself, a lot of my patients were kind of meat and potatoes, and that's what they're used to eating. Tell us a little bit more about what Mind diet is and what the difference between that and Mediterranean is.
Yeah, they really encompass very similar things. I think the Mind diet just discusses it more related to the brain and the connection. But the base or the foundation is a lot of plant-based foods. So again, the whole grains, plenty of fruits and vegetables, a variety of fruits and vegetables, some of the plant-based proteins too. Also including, again, some of the anti-inflammatory foods like fish would be an option that would provide some of that, less of the red meat type options, which might be more pro inflammatory. But the key thing I think is those plant-based foods being the foundation, emphasizing again the whole foods versus the processed, so we can remove some of those other things that might come with that.
Eat your vegetables.
Yes.
And then you mentioned a little bit more about, with Parkinson's, it can be kind of a sticky wicket when we're talking about proteins. And that's something that can interfere with the Parkinson's medication. So tell us a little bit more about that.
I think the key thing here is timing. And I know that can become difficult because they're already trying to manage schedules for medications.
Mhm.
And so, one thing that we talked about in our group was coming up with a schedule
Mhm.
because there's a window around taking that medication where we would want to avoid those protein-rich foods. So the timing that I shared when we discussed it that I was able to find was it was recommended to take the medications either 30 to 60 minutes before a meal that would have the protein or 1 hour after. And so we talked about kind of mapping out the day. Here's where I'm taking the medications. Where can we put those meals with protein or snacks with protein so they wouldn't interfere? I do think that's a really important piece. We talk a lot about trying to maintain muscle. And so the protein's critical there for providing that raw material to keep the muscle strong and healthy. So,
Yeah, especially as we age, we lose more muscle mass, and you're going to go to work out, you need that muscle mass as well. So, and that strength for, balance and walking and things. So it is difficult, that you said the timing, around and mapping that out, can be life consuming. You've got medications you're taking 3, 4 times a day, and now you've got to plan these meals around it. Do you like recommend anything like protein shakes or anything like that, and timing with that with the medications, or is that not something that you discuss?
I think that can be a convenient way for some people to boost their protein. Again, putting that within the window that works with their medications. I'm a big fan of smoothies
Mhm.
because then put the fruits and even some veggies in there. Maybe some good Greek yogurt for the protein that would also offer the probiotic for the gut. We do talk a lot about gut health, and I know a lot of the new information connecting the gut and the brain and that interaction is very important. So that would be it's a great vehicle to bring in a lot of different components that we recommend.
Sure. And then what about, like, are there any vitamin deficiencies with Parkinson's?
The two big ones that I see are B12, um, which is interesting because the symptoms of deficiency can very much be similar to some of the symptoms of Parkinson's. And so, kind of diving into some of the research, they're definitely exploring that connection. The interesting part with B12, a lot of the sources of it are animal based. So the primary sources. So if they are limiting protein rich foods that are animal based, that might affect that. We also don't always absorb it as well as we get older. So it could be a connection to the food, but also to what's going on in the body. The other big one is vitamin D, and not only in Parkinson's, but in so many other areas as well. And there are vitamin D receptors all over our bodies, so its influence is wide ranging. Certainly, location plays into that and the sun interaction. I lived in Portland, Oregon for 11 years, and many of my clients were deficient.
No doubt. Yeah.
So it's those two were probably the big ones that I saw connected in specifically with Parkinson's.
And D deficiency and one of the main non-motor complaints of Parkinson's is fatigue. And
Yep.
that would be correlated to that deficiency in vitamin D as well. So that's a key.
And
Um,
again,
yeah, go
B
ahead.
vit- the B vitamins as well would, play into feelings of fatigue too.
And both of them play a huge role in memory. And we know that there can be memory changes with Parkinson's. There can be memory changes overall just with aging. But if it might be related to a B12 deficiency, that can be improved with diet.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So how do you check for those things? Like what are the ways that what do you recommend as far as checking those? Is it something that's done, with their movement disorder specialist or their primary, and how often do they do that?
Both can be checked via labs.
Mhm.
So it's often something you have to ask
Mhm.
for. It may not be routinely done unless they've had issues in the past. So vitamin D especially, we'd want to have a lab value because then it'll determine are we going to supplement. If someone's truly deficient, the amount that is supplemented is very, very high. And so it's something that we need to do carefully because we can consume too much
Right,
as well. And
right,
it's what we call a fat soluble vitamin, so we can store it.
right.
So the labs are going to be most helpful to drive that.
Perfect. And then what about as far as, so that can be assessed just as a baseline, and then they work with their doctor to kind of assess when they would follow up on that, depending on the dosage and how long they've been on it.
Correct.
Okay, super. And then, so what about food wise? What are some of the brain healthy foods? That's always something that's asked, what do we eat to, improve our cognition and improve our brain function?
Yeah. And it comes from a lot of different foods. So, one, we talked a little bit about the healthy fats and the anti-inflammatory. So, omega-3s, right? So that could be from things like fish or plant-based sources like flaxseed or some of the other nuts and seeds. I love the walnuts. I always use that one in my presentations because it kind of looks like a brain when you look at the nut itself. So those, the omega-3s are actually part of the structure, literally, of the brain. So that would be a key piece. I also think the more nutrient dense foods. So when we think about like berries, oftentimes you'll see blueberries and cognition and the brain, and they just offer us so many different nutrients that are necessary for everyday function and functioning well too. They also help to protect the brain too, which is very important. So, thinking of anything that might damage the neurons, things of that nature. Certain things, again, the berries have those antioxidant rich nutrients that can help protect that structure. So,
So what are some of the ways that you help, like, what are some techniques to start incorporating some of those good foods into their diet or their regimen? Like, how do you counsel people if they're saying, I want to make these dietary changes, and maybe it seems like overwhelming to do it all at one time? Like, is there a certain way you introduce new foods, or how do you go about helping people to kind of make those permanent lifestyle changes?
yeah, I like the idea of starting small uh, and picking one or two things that you really do think you can do and then seeing how that feels. So oftentimes I'll start with things like fruits and veggies where the body's going to feel better. And I think that really reinforces making the change. Uh, I actually just had that conversation this morning on just internally feeling better is a motivator to keep trying.
Sure, sure.
Also making it easy. So we'll talk about like frozen fruits and vegetables. Often I'll hear, well, it goes bad when I buy it fresh. And, it might be very expensive, which can be true in the wintertime here. So that's another quick shift that would allow you to have it. You have it in the freezer, so it's always an easy access. The smoothies, again, is kind of a nice way where you just know you're getting it in. And it can be easier to consume for some people too, versus some of the chewing or things, with the raw fruits or veggies. But I do think starting small and then kind of building on that with the next change can be very helpful.
I agree with that completely. I've had people who try to make really big changes in their diets, and they can kind of stay on that wagon for about a week, and then they tend to fall off a little bit more. But when, we would work on just focusing on maybe on sugars, good or bad, eliminating more sugars out of the diet, or if we're focused on fats or something, that makes it more sustainable and, they can achieve those goals better. So yeah, I love that. So another thing too, I had one of my patients I ran into at the farmer's market and, they said they chop up any extras and they freeze it themselves. So it's not something they even get from the supermarket frozen. They just make sure that nothing goes to waste, that they make sure they chop up those, fresh veggies and they have them themselves in the freezer as well. So, nice. But and then what about like supplements? Are you big on supplements or is that something that you don't really kind of condone?
I think we have to be really careful.
Mhm.
Um, it's not a well-regulated industry, and I think oftentimes they market really well.
Right.
So and pull people in, but we don't always know if those supplements are safe.
Mhm.
So I'm always a fan of food first if we can. So again, thinking fruits and vegetables, we can't mimic, you can't replace in a supplement what we get from that real food and the benefits that that offers. So I'd prefer food first, but certain nutrients like vitamin D, for example, there's not a lot of food sources. And we're not going to promote being out in the sun for long periods of time. And so I think there's a purpose. If there's a purpose and a reason we're doing it, they can be helpful, but then we just need to choose those safely.
So you don't want to make it just an alternative. You don't want to get it all just from a pill and then still eat bad.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
No.
Because the food offers us, even thinking fiber, right? Sure, we could take a fiber supplement, but it's still, we can find that all in the real package of the food. So,
It's so, it's so true about the packaging and the labeling. It was my husband and I were driving up north and we stopped at a gas station and he comes into the car and he was so proud of himself because he got this healthy drink, and as he's driving and I'm looking at the label, I look at it and it had as much sugar in as a Mountain Dew, and I'm like, this is not healthy. It was terrible, but they labeled it that way. And we are kind of making those instant decisions in a day and trying to make healthy choices and trusting the labels. And so it is really important, like you said, to read those labels, especially like some of those bad foods, like the sugars and things, and looking for those high fructose corn syrups and things like that. What are some of the other like bad things or bad foods that we should be trying to get out of our diet?
think being mindful of some of the fast foods, and like the types of fats that they're using to prepare those, like fried foods, those can be more pro-inflammatory. So that would be countering some of the things that we're trying to do with the diet to help. So really decrease that inflammation. I think you mentioned the added sugars, certainly a big one that affects a lot of different conditions. And again, maybe part of kind of that pro-inflammatory state. So I think overall, if we can shift again more towards the whole foods, less of those processed, and be mindful, especially with fast foods and going out to eat, kind of navigating that just like we might a food label
Right.
to just to explore that.
Pick the
So
baked cod instead of the fish fry, right?
yes.
Yeah. Or better yet, salmon, but not everybody likes salmon. So I guess the question is, so then you go shopping, you get those, vegetables and things. What do you do when you get home? What if you're not used to cooking that way or like a Mediterranean diet? Do you have like any cookbooks that you recommend or places to get recipes if people are trying to learn to cook a different way?
Yeah. There are some great cookbooks and it helps, to have the search of the Mediterranean diet or the Mind diet will bring up a lot of options. One website I really like is Eating Well
Mm.
because it just has a lot of different options. So if you're looking for like 5 ingredients or less, Mediterranean, you could type that in and have some options. And it seems like most people like the recipes that they've found on there. Um, I think getting creative, so that's one thing I love to do is just trying to help people find fun ways and easy ways. So like with vegetables, one thing we'll do is like roasted veggies where you can do a big pan of them and then you're not cooking them every day. You have options. Again, the frozen being just fine, where it's okay to incorporate that as a easier way with less prep to get started. So,
Yeah, that's great. I think that that's just a struggle that people have is trying to figure out, how to cook differently. And um, it's even more difficult, I think, as caregivers who are trying to support somebody else who, that can be a little hard. So say you have Parkinson's and your wife loves to bake, and you're the recipient, of all the baked goods. That can be
yeah.
really hard to like try to uphold those dietary changes if somebody else isn't eating the same way and things. And it's something you have to do as a couple or as a family to make those lifestyle changes. So do you have any recommendations there if somebody's trying to make those changes, like, and have, as a caregiver, how can they support that person?
Yeah. I think what you said is, doing it together.
Mhm.
Um, I know for us at home, my husband is a diabetic, so
Mhm.
trying to help with that and not, I mean, I eat well, but I'm not going to put things in front of him or have something that he can't have because I want to support that.
Mhm.
And it doesn't mean you can't, but I think it's easier when you do it together. Like the smoothie idea, I make a batch for both of us.
Mhm.
So has his, I have mine, and then again, I'm supporting, overall being healthier with that. I think doing it together is really one of the big things I see being most effective on that.
For us, we've had to just my husband and I tend to eat differently than what he does too. And he wants to eat cleaner, but he struggles with it. And I've just found that not bringing the other stuff in the house helps. If you don't have it there, you don't eat it, And so people who like have a habit of eating a lot of, if it's the cookies are there, they eat 10 cookies as opposed to being able to control themselves to eat one cookie, So just not having that stimulus to try to have that self-control. If you just don't bring it in the house, it sure changes things. But yeah, absolutely, with they can cook together, but it can be a challenge, like you said, Kate. Your husband's diabetic and maybe you're not, or maybe somebody has another health condition that requires dietary changes and you're trying to blend those two different types of diets. It can certainly be challenging.
Yeah.
And sometimes I have had caregivers who are really pushing the diet, but the person's not really willing to take it. They aren't ready yet or willing maybe to eat that way and make those changes. What about that? How do they, if they know what's best for them, they're caregivers and you're trying to say, hey, we need to do this better, but that person's, resistant. Any tips for that?
I think that's a tough one with, just behavior change. If they're not ready, that's going to be hard. But I think it's also how we talk about it too. Even what you just mentioned, sometimes these restriction, when we focus on the restrictive part, so I can't have this, I can't have that. I think that mindset affects us. So if we shift to, I can have this, so the fish fry, right? So I can still go out for the fish fry, but here's what I'm going to have as a kind of a compromise to those two things.
Right.
We want to go out to eat. Well, I'm going to have the main part of the meal, but for my side, I'm not going to have the French fries. I'm going to have something else.
Yeah. That's such a
So,
good point, right? Going out to eat is really difficult to find places that have, kind of more clean eating and healthier meals. That's a challenge.
yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, that's super. Thank you so much. So, what do you feel is like, do you have any extra tips? Anything else that you've shared with your clients that would be helpful?
Well, I did actually gift them all a really nice water bottle. Because that's probably one of the biggest things our members struggle with is getting enough fluids in,
Right,
which certainly would affect the constipation piece. It certainly affects their symptoms that we might see during class.
right.
Uh, Maybe they feel dizzy or lightheaded or so hydration is a really big one too that sometimes gets overlooked.
Mhm.
And I know we still have work to do in our class because I watch how far their water bottle comes down during an hour plus class. So I think that's a really big one. And the other thing I think is just doing the best that you can and not getting hard on yourself if it's sometimes we envision this perfect diet. And we can do a lot of good with just little things paired together, building up to have a bigger impact. So I think that's a big one.
And making sure it tastes good, right? It has to taste good.
And they're more apt to do it when it does.
Yeah. I love that you brought up the water because I am a huge component of water. Is there any other tips water wise or hydration wise, that even foods that they can eat or anything that way that would be beneficial to them if they're just trying to increase their fluids?
I always tell them that fruits and vegetables have a very high water content. So you get the bonus of both there, the nutrient dense fruits and veggies, but then the fluids too. Even things like soups, a broth soup that might allow to build up some of those fluids, but also making sure that they keep their water bottle with them throughout the day as a
And
reminder.
see it. Yeah, you have to see it and have it nearby so that you remember to take a drink. It's very visual.
Yeah. And sometimes maybe pairing it, they have their set of alarms that
Mhm.
go to remind them. So maybe it's timing that if I'm going to take my medication, I'm going to drink, X number of ounces of fluid with that. So,
Yeah, and that's a great tip too, just getting it in when you're, excuse me, taking your medications. I really like that advice.
yeah.
What about research in the area of nutrition and Parkinson's? Is there much on that?
The one that fascinates me right now is really looking at the gut,
Mhm.
and, identifying alpha-synuclein, the gut, and that connection. So I think that is definitely an area that's not just with Parkinson's, but across the board. We're learning so much more about the gut bacteria and could we help, earlier on by implementing nutrition strategies and other strategies to support the gut. So that's one I'm just very excited about.
Yeah,
Um, I also think kind of reflecting back to the B12 and vitamin D, are there nutrition things that we can target earlier in life to help with a prevention aspect to them? And so that I think would be very encouraging too.
I'm going to wrap up with my famous question, that if you were to give our listeners one piece of empowering advice, what would it be?
My biggest thing is staying positive and putting one step in front of the other and knowing that you're doing a good job and a good thing to take care of your body. So that's my biggest piece.
Super. Kate, I thank you so much for being with me today. I know that everybody's going to enjoy this video and get a lot of good nutritional facts from you. So I appreciate your time.
Excellent. Thank you for having me.
Thanks. The Wisconsin Parkinson Association is a grassroots organization funded by people like you. To support more local programming like this, visit wiparkinson.org.